Mr. President, I'm going to engage in a colloquy with some of my colleagues today about the motion that is now pending, on which we will vote later this afternoon or early evening. It's simply a motion to commit the bill to the Finance Committee and have the Finance Committee make the bill comply with the President's pledge. And here's the President's pledge. In the President's own words, I can make a firm pledge: no family making less than $250,000 will see their taxes increase. Not your income taxes, not your payroll taxes, not your capital gains taxes, not any of your taxes. You will not see any of your taxes increase one single dime. Now, you have just heard my colleague from Montana say that the bill complies with this pledge. Well, in the first place, if that were true, then there would be no harm in having the Finance Committee scour through it and make sure that it does, and refer the bill back to be sure that it doesn't tax those in the middle class. But the reality is, it's very clear that this legislation violates this pledge of the President. As a matter of fact, there are over $493 billion of new taxes in this bill, meant to offset the $2.5 trillion during its first 10 full years of implementation of spending in the bill. Let's look at this next chart. If you just look at the graph on taxes, if you look at the first 10 years, and this graph includes the fees also that are imposed that the CBO and joint tax has said will be passed right on through to the consumer. There are $704 billion of taxes and fees in the first 10 years of this bill. If you look at the 10 years of full implementation, meaning the first 10 years when the spending actually starts, the taxes and fees are actually $1.28 trillion. Now, my colleague says that actually this is a net tax cut bill, and that it complies with the President's pledge because when you take all of the refundable tax credits in the bill and offset them against these tax increases, there's a net reduction in taxes. Well, in the first place, that's not true when you take into account the fees. And in the second place, I don't think that's what the President was talking about. He didn't mean, did he, that you won't see your taxes go up more than someone else's taxes go down? No. He told people in America that they would not see their taxes go up. And yet what this bill does, according to the joint tax analysis, is that by 2019, at least 73 million American households earning below $200,000 will face a tax increase. Now, if that's not violating the President's pledge, I don't know what is. But even if you take the numbers that the majority is trying to use here and claim that those are tax cuts. Let's see the next chart. I want to use this one. What my colleague from Montana is talking about is about $400 billion of what are called refundable tax credits. And he wants to offset these refundable tax credits in the bill against the hundreds of billions of dollars of tax increases and say there's a net tax cut and therefore no problem. Well, first of all, as I said, that is a problem. But secondly, what is a refundable tax credit? $288 billion, or 73% of the so-called tax credit or tax cuts that my colleague from Montana is talking about, are payments by the federal government to individuals or families who do not have tax liability. It's a direct government subsidy. CBO scores these payments as a federal outlay, as spending, not as tax relief, which is exactly what they are. And so I just think it's a little bit less than credible to say that we have a tax cut bill here when 3/4 of the tax cut, the so-called tax cuts, don't even go to reduce tax liability for taxpayers.
My colleague yield just
Yes.
Would the Congressional Budget Office, which is nonpartisan, would it score a welfare payment the same as these so-called tax credits?
My colleague is exactly right. A welfare payment or a payment of a subsidy to an individual in the United States would be scored as a federal outlay or as federal spending, as is a refundable tax credit paid to an individual who has no tax liability. But let's assume that we even accept that argument, that that's a tax cut. Even if you offset all of that, remember the one chart just a minute ago said 73 million people would pay taxes. Even if you give them credit for that argument, there are still going to be 42 million people making less than $200,000 a year who will face a net tax increase. And Mr. President, that is a violation of the President's pledge, and all this motion does is send the bill back to the Finance Committee that writes tax policy to correct that. The President pledged. The motion helps this bill comply with the President's pledge. Now, the senator from Montana also used another example, trying to say, well, but some of these people who are paying more taxes are getting higher wages. This is the game that's going on. The employer of these people that the senator was talking about today provides a salary and health care to that employee. And in this example, it's $50,000 of wages and $10,000 of health care benefits. This bill will now impose a hefty, I think it's a 40 or 45% tax on this health care plan because it's too good of a health care plan. And what CBO and joint tax tell us is that because of that immense tax, 40 or 45% tax, the employer is just going to cut the health care plan down to where it's not taxed anymore and provide those dollars to the employee with an increased wage. So what will happen is this young lady will get maybe $53,000 in wages instead of $50,000, only $7,000 of health care, and her net employment compensation will still be the same, $60,000, except that now she'll pay taxes on an extra $3,000, so her net employment package will go down, not up. And she and 73 million Americans like her will end up with a smaller employment package, less health care benefits, and an increased federal tax liability. That's the way the bill works. And for issue after issue, there are taxes after taxes after taxes in this bill that are going to be paid by the people in this country who earn less than those in the threshold that the President identified. And that's why we simply ask that the bill be sent to the Finance Committee to have this violation of the President's pledge and this bad policy of increasing taxes on the middle class in America to pay for a huge new government entitlement program be removed from the bill.
Well, if I could ask my colleague from Idaho, because I was reading a national publication yesterday, and the headline is "Making a Nightmare Out of Health Care." The editorial says taxes will go up, and this says that the proposed overhaul contains at last count, 13 different tax hikes. It goes on to say that they quote the Joint Tax Committee, and it said for any one person who may end up paying lower taxes, there will be nearly 4 times as many, close to 70 million people, who will pay higher taxes. And that's why I've been waiting now for a week to vote for the Crapo amendment. This is something that was introduced last Tuesday. Well, the whole week has passed, and yet the Democrats have been filibustering and preventing us from voting for this very important amendment that the American people agree with, that we ought to eliminate these taxes. We ought to stick with what the President has promised the American people. And as a result of the President's promises, I read a recent CNN poll. One, it says 61% of Americans oppose this bill that the Democrats are proposing, but it gets to the specific question of taxes and increases and the President's promise. And it says, do you think your taxes would or would not increase if this bill passes? And 85% of the Americans polled, 85% of Americans said they believe their taxes will go up. So it just seems to me, and I asked my friend from Idaho, it seems to me that the American people get it, and they realize that they're going to be hit hard with this $500 billion of tax increases, 13 different taxes, which will get put on the backs of the hardworking people of our country. Why is it that we're not allowed to vote on this amendment? I'm ready to vote for this amendment, and I appreciate the senator from Idaho bringing this amendment forward because clearly the support of the American people is behind you.
Well, I thank my colleague from Wyoming for those comments, and I would just give some statistics to the point you made. The Joint Tax Committee has analyzed just the 4 biggest tax provisions in this bill, not all of them, but the 4 biggest ones, and has concluded that only 7% of Americans would be receiving these so-called tax cuts that are really spending subsidies, but have been characterized as a tax cut in order to argue that this bill doesn't increase taxes. Only 7% of Americans will receive those, which represents about 19 million people. But 157 million people, almost 8 times that amount, who get their health insurance through their employer will not be eligible for these credits, and they will pay, on average, somewhere between $593 to $670, depending on what their income categories are, a year in new taxes that are clearly and squarely put on their shoulders in this bill. I note my colleague from Tennessee is
I wanted to congratulate the senator from Idaho for his amendment to help the president keep his commitment. That's basically what it is, and I would think that our friends on the other side of the aisle would all want to join us in that. The president said we're not going to raise taxes on people making less than $250,000 a year, and it's amazing to hear the comments that I've just heard. I mean, the whole crux of the bill, I mean, when we stop and think about, regardless of whatever the Democrats decide to do about this so-called public option, they still seem determined, or at least the majority leadership seems determined, to engage in this political kamikaze mission toward an historic mistake. There's all this talk about history, but there are lots of different kinds of history, and a lot of historic mistakes have been made about taxes. For example, there was the Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1930. That was a big tax. Sounded like a good idea at the time. President Hoover, a Republican president, recommended it. The idea was to protect American jobs by keeping out cheaper foreign products, and it led us into the Great Depression. It was a historic mistake. There was, more recently, the boat luxury tax. Now, this sounds good. It was part of the budget deal of 1990. Congress put a 10% luxury tax on boats costing more than $100,000. That sound familiar? We're going to get the rich people. Well, it didn't get the rich people. It got the working people. And the unintended consequences was it sank the boat industry, costing 7,600 jobs, according to the Joint Economic Commission, and Congress rushed back in and repealed that historic mistake. There was the Medicare Catastrophic Coverage Act of 1988, another good-sounding goal to help older people reduce the risk for illness-related catastrophic financial losses. But a lot of our senior Americans resented the ideas of paying additional taxes for that coverage. They revolted, and Congress, less than a year and a half later, repealed it. And then we all remember the millionaire's tax. I mean, that's a matter of history. The late 1960s, there were 155 high-income Americans who weren't paying any federal income tax, so Congress imposed something that's called the alternative minimum tax, and last year it affected 28 million taxpayers. So I would say to my friend from Idaho, I think he's doing the country and the president a great service by offering this amendment to help keep the promise, because whatever the majority leader decides to do about the government option, this legislation is still, when fully implemented, $1 million in Medicare cuts 5 years before Medicare is scheduled to go broke, according to its trustees. It's nearly $1 trillion in new taxes over 10 years when fully implemented, as the senator from Idaho has pointed out. There's no question about that. It's an increase in premiums for most Americans, according to the Congressional Budget Office. And yesterday on this floor, we talked about the huge bill that we're about to send to states to help pay for this in the Medicaid programs. So it's important to support the Crapo amendment, and it's important for our country not to have this historic mistake thrust upon them.
Well, I would like to jump in here and ask the senator from Idaho a question. From what I understand, the taxes go into effect, actually this is from yesterday, so I think it would be in 17 days from now, based on the current bill that's before us. All of these taxes that you have in your chart there the income, all the taxes that the president said he would not violate. I think the article yesterday said 13 taxes. We know at least 9 absolute taxes that will go into effect. But the tax subsidies, these payments to folks who don't have a tax liability, those aren't received for 1,479 days. Isn't that correct?
The senator from Nevada is correct. The fact is that the taxes start on day one of the bill. The spending, which is what these alleged tax cuts are that my colleague from the other side was talking about, doesn't start until the 4th year or 2014. And that's just one of the budget gimmicks in the bill in order to try to claim that it doesn't drive the deficit up. Have 10 years of tax increases and only 6 years of spending to offset against it. And I think that's how they started the spending date, is they just figured out how long they had to delay it so that they could claim that it was not going to drive up the deficit.
Well, I want to address one of the taxes, so-called Cadillac tax, that the Democrats have put into this bill. The problem is they did not index it for inflation. So as time goes forward, what we can see here under the red line here, this is the threshold. They index it for what's called the Consumer Price Index, plus 1%. That goes up a little bit. Problem is, medical inflation is going up much faster. So what happens is, this is the blue line is the average plan in the United States. That's how fast it's going up. So you can see that that's much higher, and so it starts right at this point, it starts catching most of the plans in the United States. So this 40% tax that the unions are running ads against right now is going to start getting almost all Americans' plans in the future. That's the reason that a lot of people don't realize this is a tax, may not get them today, but it's going to get them eventually. And what's going to happen is this tax will be passed on to them in lower benefits.
The senator from Nevada is correct. And before I toss the floor to the senator from Texas who wants to make some comments, I would just point out the point that you made is statistically made by joint tax. By 2019, at least 73 million American households, and that's not 73 million Americans, that's 73 million American households earning below $200,000 are going to face these tax increases.
I would just ask the senator from Idaho if I could respond, because I was thinking when the senator from Tennessee was talking about the luxury taxes and how everyone thought that felt so good to have a tax against luxury boats, and who suffered? The workers. And then the catastrophic Medicare coverage, which resulted in a tax on seniors who were going to have that coverage, and seniors erupted, and that was repealed, and then followed on by the senator from Nevada who talks about the Cadillac plan, which is the high-end plan of coverage. And I thought, maybe Congress has learned something. Maybe the Democrats are onto something. They've listened to the history of all of these good-sounding taxes on rich people or people who buy expensive things. And as the senator from Nevada has pointed out, they've now learned that they really probably ought to go ahead and tax both ends instead of just the high end, because in this bill, you have a tax on the high-end plans. You have a tax on employers that provide too much coverage. Oh, but we also tax the people who don't have any coverage. So if it's too small, you get taxed. And if it's too big, you get taxed. So it seems like maybe the Democrats learned the wrong lesson. And it's not that you tax just the rich or the people who buy expensive things now, it's that you tax both ends to make sure that you get every little drop of taxpayer dollars. Well, I think we have shown on this floor from the endless hours of debate that everyone in America is going to be taxed, because the taxes that take effect in 3 weeks' time Under this bill, January of 2010, the major tax increase takes place. And that's the tax increase on prescription drugs, on insurance companies who are going to have to raise their premiums. The drug costs are going to go up, and medical equipment, which is the essential for seniors, especially for everyone who needs some form of equipment. The equipment manufacturers are going to have the tax. So $100 billion in new taxes start next January, 3 weeks from now. So every person in America is going to pay taxes in the form of higher prices starting in 3 weeks. So then the senator from South Dakota and I are sponsoring the legislation because the next question would be, oh, well, my goodness, if we're going to be taxed in 3 weeks, surely we're going to have some sort of benefit offered in 3 weeks, some sort of low-cost health plan or option. 3 weeks, surely. Oh, no. No, we're not going to have any of the plan that would offer options to people. Not in 2010, not in 2011, no, not in 2012, not in 2013, but 2014. So all these higher prices are going to start kicking in January, and then we're going to have the Cadillac plan that the senator from Nevada mentioned in 2013, all being paid before one supposed benefit would be available. If this is not a bait and switch, I've never seen one. And the senator from South Dakota and I are going to offer the next amendment after the ones that are in the tranche right now to just very simply say, whatever the bill is in the end, there will be no taxes until there is a plan. Not one dime of taxes could take effect until there is actually some sort of plan available that would hopefully give some sort of benefit to people, which is what is being promised. So I would just ask the senator from South Dakota if that's his understanding, that we would at least draw a line. And whereas Senator Crapo's motion, which I support, and I know everyone on the floor talking this morning supports, to say there will be no taxes to anyone who makes under $200,000, but even if there are taxes in the end, they won't take effect until there is some sort of plan available for people that is going to help Americans who don't have coverage and for whom we're not able to lower the cost, which is what the Republicans are trying to do. At least we would set that deadline. And I would just ask the senator from South Dakota what he's been hearing about this bill.
My colleague from Texas is exactly right. And her amendment and the amendment that I'm co-sponsoring, which we hope to vote on next, will be a follow-on amendment to the amendment that the senator from Idaho is offering. But it seems just a basic principle and matter of fairness to the American people that if you are going to create public policy, that you do it in a way that treats people fairly and doesn't raise their taxes before a single dollar of the premium tax credits and the exchanges that are designed to create the new insurance product for people would take effect. And that's what this bill does. And the senator from Idaho, his amendment, which recommits all the tax increases, and I will support that wholeheartedly, and I hope my colleagues here in the Senate will too, because these tax increases are the absolute worst thing that we can do at a time when we've got an economy in recession, and we're asking small businesses to help lead us out of the recession. 70% of the jobs are created in this country are created by small businesses. It's much higher in my state of South Dakota. And so these tax increases could not be more poorly timed in terms of getting this economy restarted and creating jobs for Americans and getting them back to work, which, of course, since most people get their insurance, at least currently, through their employer, one of the best things you can do is to provide insurance is to put people back to work. And this bill would have the opposite effect. It's a job killer because of all the tax increases, and every small business organization has said that, which is why it's so important that we support the senator from Idaho's amendment. Senator from Texas, Senator Hutchison, and I also will offer this amendment, hopefully we'll get a vote on later, that would at least delay the tax increases until such time as the benefits begin. It essentially aligns the revenue increases and the benefits so that they're synchronized and that you don't have this period of 10 years where you're taxing people for 10 but only delivering a benefit for 6. That, again, I think violates a basic principle of fairness that most Americans should expect when it comes to their elected leaders making public policy, which will have a profound impact on them and their lives. And so I certainly hope we get a vote on that amendment, and I hope our colleagues will support it. It's, that to me it's unconscionable that you would raise taxes by $72 billion, which is what this does in the year up until the year 2014, before the premium subsidies and the exchanges kick in, which would deliver the benefits that are supposed to be delivered under this bill. So, the Senator from Texas, I look forward to getting a vote on that amendment. I hope that we can win on the Crapo amendment later today, and appreciate my other colleagues being here to point out how important it is that we have public policy that is fair, and also that we not do things that are counter to job creation at a time when we're asking small businesses to get out there and to create jobs and to make investment. So,
well, and it seems that the senator from Idaho had a picture of a woman who's making $50,000 a year, and then the health benefits as a result. And my concern is not just her taxes. My concern is also her job. It's also the fact that she would still have a job. Because what I hear from the people of Wyoming is, don't raise my taxes, don't cut my Medicare, don't make matters worse than they are right now in this economy where we have 10% unemployment. And like the senator from South Dakota, I'm a member of the organization, National Federation of Independent Business, member for years. They're telling us that as these taxes are raised and collected in 2010 and 11 and 12 and 13, in 2010, going to lose 400,000 jobs in America, and in 2011 another 400,000 and another 400,000 after that and another 400,000 as the taxes continue to be collected. So they would be losing in this country 1.6 million jobs as a result of these increased taxes that all Americans are going to have to pay. So I would ask the senator from Idaho, isn't it even more critical that we pass your amendment? In addition to the fact that we don't want these taxes, they're going to hurt our economy across the board.
Well, the senator from Wyoming is exactly right. The wrong thing to do when our economy needs to be strengthened and restarted, if you will, is to apply a huge amount of new taxes. And let's just take the example that we talked about earlier. This young lady, under the bill in the Senate right now, will not only see her health benefits go down, but the net value of her compensation package will go down. Now, she will get a little extra wages in order to offset the reduction of her health care benefits, but those will be taxed, and her net compensation package will go down. And the point here is this, and it's a little bit ironic, that today the Democrat caucus is going to be meeting with the president at the White House in yet one more closed-door meeting where they're going to be trying to redraft the bill in order to get around some of the problems, which I hope they will let the American public see in time to debate before they come out and try to vote on it again. But it's kind of ironic that as the Democrats come out of that caucus, if they don't support this amendment, they will be violating two of the president's pledges. One, his pledge. After meeting with him, they'll be violating his pledge to not tax any Americans who make less than $200,000 individual or $250 family, as well as his pledge that if you like it, you can keep it, because this young lady, if she likes her package, she can't keep it. She will not have that option. Her $10,000 health care package will be reduced at least $2,000 down to the minimum now new government-designed acceptable policy, and probably a little more than that to give a buffer. So she'll see about a 20 or 30% reduction in her health care package against her will. And I would be willing to bet you that she'd prefer to keep the one she's got now. Most Americans do like the insurance they're getting through their employers.
Well, I would like to ask the senator from Idaho a question. These are, first of all, the 9 taxes we know for sure that are raised. The 40% Cadillac plant tax, a separate tax on insurances. We have the employer tax, the drug tax, the lab tax, the medical device tax, the failure to buy insurance tax, the cosmetic surgery tax, and the increased employee Medicare tax. In our states, people think, we'll pass a sales tax and the business will just pay the sales tax. I'd like to ask the senator, who actually pays the sales tax, and who is Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation, which are both nonpartisan, who have they said are going to pay these taxes?
Well, the senator who serves on the Finance Committee was there when the Joint Tax and CBO experts were asked this question, and they very squarely and directly said that these taxes and fees will be passed on virtually 100% to the consumer, which means two things. First of all, the ones that are taxes will just be taxes passed on to the consumer, as shown in the example of the young lady that we looked at here. Those ones that are fees will simply be passed on in the form of higher costs for medical services or higher premiums, which is one of the reasons why, contrary to the assertions by the other side, this bill will drive up the cost of health care and will drive up the cost of premiums, not down.
The last thing I'd like to point out goes along with your chart over there. This is what the Joint Committee on Taxation has said. 84% of all of the taxes being paid in this bill are being paid by those making less than $200,000 a year. If this isn't a direct violation of the president's promise not to raise one dime of their taxes, I don't know what is. I don't understand how the president can sign this bill and keep to the promise that he made during the campaign.
Well, I agree with the senator from Nevada, and it's disturbing, frankly, to see the responses. First, the response that this bill actually doesn't increase taxes, it cuts taxes. Well, that flies right in the face of the very reports and analysis by Joint Tax and CBO. And I, again, encourage everybody in America to read this bill. It's available on my website, on the Republican website, on the C-SPAN website, and a number of others. In fact, we're going to put up a reference to where you can find the bill to read it if you want to try to parse through who's really telling the truth here. But the bottom line is taxes in the first 10 years, $493 billion. And when you add fees to that, it's more like $700 billion. And if you count the first full 10 years of implementation, it's over $1 trillion of new taxes. And the only response to that is to try to say that the subsidies for health insurance for those who are not able to purchase their own insurance are tax cuts, even though 3/4 of them go to those who are not at this point at a level where they are incurring a tax liability.
From Idaho, my understanding is too, maybe you can correct this, is that do those premium tax credits actually go to the taxpayer, or do they? I mean, is that when they talk about this as a tax cut for people, does it end up in the pocket of the average taxpayer in this country?
Well, the senator from South Dakota is correct. In fact, this subsidy is not paid to the individual; it's paid directly to the insurance company. So of the 1/4 of people receiving this subsidy who do actually pay income taxes, their income taxes will, in fact, stay the same. They are not actually getting a tax cut. What they are getting is a subsidy for the purchase of insurance that is managed through the tax code, but is paid directly to the insurance company.
Well, that's precisely why the argument that's made by the other side that somehow this is a tax cut sort of defies what I think most Americans have come to expect when they get a tax cut, and that is that they get to keep more of what they earn. You know, that's more money in their pocket, when what we're talking about here really is a payment that will be made to an insurance company, tax credit for premium subsidies that will go to an insurance company. And there will be very few Americans, as a percentage of the total population, who will actually derive any sort of benefit from that. My understanding is about 10%, is that correct, of all Americans will get some benefit from the premium subsidies that will go to the insurance company, not directly to the taxpayer.
Actually 7%.
7%, okay. So you got a very small number of Americans who are going to derive a benefit from this. But you got a whole lot of Americans who are actually going to be paying the freight for this. And you mentioned earlier, I saw your chart up there, 73 million Americans are going to end up with higher taxes as a result of this, and that many of the premium tax credits, even those that would, if you could give credit to the taxpayer as receiving this, which you can't because it goes to the insurance company, but if you could, that 3/4 of that is going to go to people who currently have no income tax liability. And so it seems like the advertising on this is very inconsistent with the reality and the facts. Facts are that most Americans are going to see taxes go up, going to see premiums go up. Very few number of Americans are going to get some premium tax tax credit to help subsidize their premium costs, but that's going to go directly to the insurance company. And as I understand, the senator from Idaho, the senator from Nevada are both members of the Finance Committee, so you've been involved with this from the very beginning. But that's my understanding of this, which is hard to fathom how that constitutes what most Americans have come to believe is a tax cut.
Yeah, the
senator from Idaho has consumed 35 minutes.
Thank you.
If I could just take 1 minute, I agree with the senator from South Dakota. I mean, this is people who might be watching this must be thinking, well, wait a minute here. And let me just ask the two members of the Finance Committee. I mean, isn't it true? I mean, what they're trying to say is that a Medicare cut is not a Medicare cut, and that a tax increase is not a tax increase, and that a premium increase is not a premium increase. I mean, isn't it true that when the bill is fully implemented, there'll be nearly $1 trillion in Medicare cuts? And isn't it true that there'll be nearly about $1 trillion when fully implemented in new taxes? And isn't it true that the Congressional Budget Office has said that's all going to be passed on to people? And isn't it true that that all starts in January if the bill passes? And isn't it also true that the Congressional Budget Office has said that premiums are going to continue to go up, and for people in the individual market, they're going to go up even more? I mean, isn't that all true?
I'll respond first. The senator from Tennessee is exactly right. Again, I'll have in this chart, these are the tax increases for the first 10 years of the bill. And this chart includes the fees and penalties that are charged as well. And the total there is $704 billion. If you actually start when the bill totally becomes implemented, or starting to be implemented in 2014, to compare taxes to spending, the actual taxes and fees that are going to be collected are $1.3 trillion almost.
Well, there's no question. I could answer your question by true. You know, the old saying, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. These taxes, sometimes they're called fees, okay? A tax, the Supreme Court's actually ruled that a fee that actually acts like a tax is, in fact, a tax. That's exactly what most of these provisions that we've talked about before, we call them a tax because that's exactly what they are. These 9 new taxes are really a tax. And you're exactly right. The Joint Committee on Taxation and Congressional Budget Office have said that these are going to be passed on to the consumer. And what they've also said, and I thought this was very significant, 84% of all of these taxes are going to be passed on to people who make less than $200,000 a year. And that's, I think, what we've all been saying is the other side has said, no, we're just going to tax the rich for this. Well, when 84% of that tax burden is paid by people making less than $200,000 a year, and the vast majority is also paid by people making less than $100,000. So this isn't like just the $100,000 to $200,000. The vast majority is being paid by people less than $100,000 a year, the same as sales tax. Sales taxes, it's been called a regressive tax. These are regressive taxes that the Democrats are passing on to the American people.
Well, Mr. President, to conclude, I'd like to thank my colleagues for coming over and speaking today and discussing this issue with me. And I'd just like to conclude by pointing out once again, the President said he could make a firm pledge, no family making less than $250,000 will see their taxes increase. Not your income taxes, not your payroll taxes, not your capital gains taxes, not any of your taxes. You will not see any of your taxes increase one single dime. But there are billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of tax increases in this bill that are going to fall squarely on the backs of the middle class. And our motion simply says, let's fix that and take it out. The bottom line here is those who are saying that that is not the case are trying, in the first case, to say, well, there are subsidies in the bill that almost equal the amount of these taxes, and therefore it's really a net tax cut. Well, first of all, subsidies are not tax cuts. 3/4 of them go to individuals who have no tax liability, and the other 1/4 does not reduce the tax liability of the individuals who are getting the insurance subsidy. And even if you accept all of that kind of argument, the President was not saying you will not see net taxes go up in America. The President was not saying we will not cut or not increase your taxes by more than we will cut someone else's taxes. I don't think anybody expected that was what he was saying. The President was saying that he would not raise taxes in this bill. And this bill violates that pledge. Therefore, we should support the motion to send this bill back to the Finance Committee to fix that glaring problem. With that, Mr. President, I reserve the balance of my time.